You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 108 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. After a wonderful camping trip last week at Big Sur on the coast of California, I'm happy to be back with a new episode. And this week will feature one of my old sponsees, Chris L., who gave an experience, strength, and hope share at our noon Zoom meeting about a month ago. One of the things that Chris talked about was outside help, and he referenced the Green Book, pages 73 and 74. So I wanted to read the opening and closing paragraphs of the section called Outside Help on those pages, and I believe I've read part of these on previous episodes of the podcast, but thought they would be perfect for this episode. Starting off on page 73, Outside Help. SAA offers a program of recovery from sex addiction. Although our experience has shown that the 12 steps lead to a spiritual awakening and provide invaluable guidance for a new way of life, we do not claim that our program provides answers to every problem or situation that we might face. Many of us have felt the need to seek help from outside the fellowship in addition to the support we receive in our SAA groups. We are encouraged by our friends in recovery to take whatever action necessary to further our well-being and personal growth. And skipping down toward the bottom of page 74, the last two paragraphs. For us, it was important to recognize that none of the resources mentioned above are substitutes for working the SAA program. SAA neither endorses nor opposes any other fellowship or religious organization, or the use of any particular medication or form of therapy. As SAA members, we view all these as outside help that is available if we need it. As we grow in recovery, we discover what we need in order to take care of ourselves and give ourselves permission to meet those needs. Outside resources are available as part of our self-care. We also grow in our willingness and ability to reach out beyond the SAA program, enjoy a greater connection with people, and engage with life. We gain not only freedom from our disease, but the freedom to be at home in the world. That is such a great reading, and I hope that will give a little insight for what Chris spoke about when he mentioned those pages in his share. And before sharing Chris's recording, I wanted to mention a few things. I'll be reading some emails and YouTube comments at the end of this episode, as well as sharing a few songs mentioned. I will also have an update on the upcoming Bay Area Giving Thanks event and the SAA COSA speaker meeting, and finally an update on future episodes of the podcast. I'm now ready to turn it over to the Experience, Strength, and Hope recording at the noon Zoom meeting with Chris L. So we did not record the intro to Chris's share, but we did record a few comments afterwards. Anyway, here it is. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris, and I'm a sex addict. My addiction with sex began at an early age. I remember playing hide and seek and receiving several kisses on the lips from my babysitter when she found me in the closet around the age of 7 or 8. Even at this early age, it seems I developed a fascination with sex, and the Sears catalog lingerie section was my best friend. Sex became the biggest focus of my life very quickly. By the age of 9 or 10, I was regularly pleasuring myself and seeking opportunities when I could isolate and feel that pleasure again. I knew that what I was doing was against my parents' rules, the church, morals I'd been taught, but I chose to ignore all that. In fact, it probably even contributed to the excitement. As I grew older, I was continuously looking for actual sex. And when I was 12, I had a 15-year-old girlfriend, and I convinced her to have sex with me. When we got caught, I apologized to her family at the urging of my family and our church. But after about a week, the urges were too strong. I folded, asked her again, and we were right back in the same place. And only from then on, we were just more careful. And we would sneak out to do it over and over again. Once I had sexual intercourse, the urges only became that much stronger until it really became my only focus with girls and later on women. Now, once I had sex with them, the relationship was not going to last much longer. As long as they let me have sex with them with no strings attached, whenever I wanted, however I wanted, it was fine. But if they wanted me to be a real boyfriend, to be loving to them, or anything like that in the long term, that relationship usually ended pretty quickly. I didn't really know what that meant. My examples of how to be a man and woman were very twisted, and I just really didn't understand the way they worked. So this behavior continued into my young adulthood, and I did what I thought was the usual male route of strippers, bachelor parties, and then I moved on to massage parlors, prostitutes, and I left a trail of broken girlfriends and even several wives along the way. I justified my actions, always. I'd say, if my wife won't sleep with me, then I'll take care of myself. Or if I found them cheating on me, I would decide it was only fair that I reciprocate in kind. So when taking care of myself wasn't enough, then I'd frantically try and find a prostitute. If that didn't work, I'd find a massage parlor that was open late. Of course, again, I just justified all this. It was just a service I was paying for. These people wouldn't be there if they didn't like it or they didn't like the money. I left a wreckage of women and relationships in my life. I didn't understand why those relationships didn't work at the time. I had several wives along the way, both of whom cheated on me. And that only further reinforced my ideas that I should do what I wanted. I turned hurt and anger at my wives into having my way with women and not caring if they were hurt. I started going to prostitutes when my wife wouldn't have sex with me in the middle of the night. I did this many, many times. Again, I felt justified, especially after it turned out she was cheating on me. This whole thought process just really set up a lot of cognitive dissonance for me. And that only fueled my behavior. When I was dating my current wife, she caught me, not once, not 2 times, 3 times cheating on her with prostitutes and arranging meetings with girlfriends. I was just doing what I'd always done. I was used to living a separate and secret life, and I wasn't willing to give it up and get hurt again. The last time that I was caught with my wife now, but girlfriend at the time, she found out that I'd had a prostitute over while I was sleeping at one of the properties I was renovating to sell. She found the call on my cell phone, and I actually stepped away, called the prostitute, and tried to get her to participate in the lie I was selling that they were just a junk pickup company. It fell apart pretty quick. And to tell you, I felt such a piece of garbage, but I couldn't stop. This was all I knew. I'm not going to say a bunch of my stuff in my past, but I will talk about my last. One time when I was traveling for business, I was so caught up in the high of acting out that I was talked into and bought a gift card, several $100s on it, and gave the money over the phone to a prospective prostitute. Of course, that was the scam. And when I finally calmed down, I realized what had happened and how completely out of my mind I was. How stupid was that? How stupid was I? Why don't I just throw money out the window and see who picks it up? I'm sure they'll bring it back. But the urge was compelling, especially since I'd been thwarted. But this was the last time I acted out. And it was the beginning of my sobriety. And that's the date I'm counting forward from now. Because luckily through therapy, which we attended each discovery, my last therapist suggested I give Sex Addicts Anonymous a try. I attended the Monday Santa Clara Men's Noon meeting, which was the only instance of this meeting back then. And I kept coming back. I just want to read this one little thing because this next part is about strength. Prevention researchers have discovered that there are human strengths that act as buffers against mental illness or addiction: courage, future-mindedness, optimism, interpersonal skill, faith, work ethic, hope, honesty, perseverance, and the capacity for flow and insight, the ability to look inside. So I attended the Santa Clara meetings and I really tried to absorb the information and stay sober. It wasn't hard. It wasn't easy at all. I fought for about 6 months, just even trying to string together 30 days of sobriety. But then I got a sponsor, and then I started working the steps. So I don't white knuckle my addiction anymore. I have a program, my higher power. I have the fellows in my program to help, and my sponsor. As of today, I've been in the program more than 10 years, and I'm currently 8 years and 8 months sober, 104 months if you want to break it out that way. I don't even keep track of my times anymore. It has to pop up on my calendar. I don't care. I don't care what's going on, how many days it's been, how long it's been, just that I'm sober today. My program was very slow getting started. In fact, it took me about 6 months to write my first step. I finished it at the Bay Area retreat during some of the breaks we had. I was writing furiously every break we had. The retreat really supercharged my recovery and my desire to recover. And it resulted in me giving my first step presentation shortly after that. And then I worked the rest of the steps thoroughly over the next year. It took me about roughly a year once I got going and got started. Since then, I've worked the steps several more times personally, as well as in workshops, etc. And I review the steps often, and I rework my steps when they make sense. I look at the program now as a personal improvement program. I don't even mentally associate it with my sex addiction anymore. It's about improving my character, my life. When I left the Bay Area for Reno, Nevada, I was a little disheartened at the much smaller amount of available meetings. I could do face-to-face meetings several times a day, every day in the Bay Area. And there were only 2 here. And they were both at times that weren't really very convenient for my schedule. But that's okay. Addiction is not convenient. So I went to the meetings. And it wasn't easy because it was really messing with my sleep. But after talking with some members, we saw the need for additional meetings. So I checked with local churches. It took me about 3 months. And I finally found one with a room available at noon every Wednesday. The other meetings are Monday and Thursday, so this worked well. We added this additional Wednesday noon meeting for those that need to make it during the day. And the group's grown to up to 10 members, making it the most well-attended meeting in the area. All I can say about this is service keeps you sober. I volunteered for service positions almost continuously during my recovery. I firmly believe that service keeps you sober. It's not a trite phrase, and it's also a way to give back to the SAA community that's given me so much. As was mentioned earlier, I had my first walk into the rooms too, and I was a blubbering mess. I think I broke down and cried my first 2 shares. I'm surprised I made them through them. That's how tore up I was. The SAA community has given me so much. And not only that, but it's about service to our fellow sex addict. Sometimes just showing up for a meeting is a service. Other times it can be more like volunteering for literature, treasurer, or secretary position. I try to step up whenever I can, and I encourage all people in the program to do the same. In my opinion, it should be a bit of a competition for service positions and not just whoever's going to do it for the nth time. Okay, off that little soapbox there, let's talk about some hope. Now we get down to the hope part. At the beginning of my recovery, hope was a long way away from me, and I didn't even know what it was. All I could see was what was in front of me and what I had to deal with. I couldn't see anything in the future that was any better than where I was now. However, after I got a sponsor and started working the program, going to meetings, and then sponsoring people over the years, I can say that for me, that's exactly what this program is about. It gives us hope that we can change. And I know that's exactly what's happening to me. I am no longer acting out. And as a result, I can focus on life's issues, which are challenging enough on their own without me acting out. I remember talking to a sponsee who was complaining about normal life's issues, money, job, trucks not working, whatever, the normal stuff. And all I did was ask him, is it easier to deal with now that you're not in your addiction? And that kind of made him think about it. And he says, that really puts it in perspective. I'm glad I'm not dealing with all these accusations anymore. I'm just dealing with a burned out starter motor. It just makes life easier to deal with. We make it harder with our addiction. And I really try to remind myself of that every day when I get caught up in life's issues. I trust the program. I know it works for me, and I have seen it save so many others over the years. In the beginning, I was sure I was so special and different that I could not be cured. But in the end, we realize we're all the same, regardless of our acting out behavior. It's a sense of self-worth and self-love that must be fostered, and the program does just that. Here's another quote I want to share. At the end of the day, our recovery must be based not on shame or perfectionism or the need to impress others, but on our willingness to be kind to ourselves. And that's what it's all about. Each step brought me closer and closer to a realization of my sex addiction, as well as how it all started with a sense of worthlessness and being not enough. But we find out that's not true. We are enough. We are not bad people. We're good people who've done bad things. The other part of the program that was so hard initially was the higher power of God. I was an agnostic coming in. I had lots of religion as a youth, and I was not interested in finding God again. And it made for a very hard time accepting God in my life. However, I was game to believe in something greater than me. And so I went with the group, right? I felt better when I was in the group, when we were chanting and saying the prayers. That was great. I never left the meetings without a smile. And it worked great. And I felt better. And I went to 5 meetings a week at that point. I was so into it. Eventually, I realized that my need to expand my understanding of my higher power, and I began to focus on nature and my surroundings. It has to be bigger. It has to be outside of me. It's not me. And this really helped to ground me. It made me understand how much bigger my higher power was than me. Eventually, through lots of prayer, meditation, and then working steps 10, 11, and 12 daily, I've come to have a very strong belief in God. And I feel very close to my higher power regularly. Now I pray my thanks and I ask for help. Then I meditate on the answer. A lot of people pray and then they walk away. No, that's not it. You got to wait. Wait for the answer. Think about it. I feel my higher power in my life, and I feel my higher power's presence in the decisions that I make every day. It gives me a tremendous sense of security knowing that my higher power always has my greatest good at heart. My daily routine is what Tony Robbins calls an hour of power every day. I do this very early in the morning, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., whatever it needs to be to get ahead of the world. It starts with a 15-minute gratitude and project list in my head while I'm still in bed. I have a 15-minute snooze on my alarm because, I fall back asleep sometimes. I get so comfortable. Then I go into my office and I close the door. I pray. I meditate. I read program material. Right now I'm reading the SAA Green Book. I tend to cycle through all the literature when I finish one, and I just finished pages 73 and 74. And nothing is a coincidence, because this section is all about outside help. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. During my recovery, I explored a lot of mainstream thought leaders, and there's too many to list here without feeling I forgot others. So I'll just leave it here. I have a good link that I'm going to put on the discussion, and if you guys are interested, it's the top 10 TED Talks on addiction. And there's some really good ones in there. And continuing with my morning routine or my hour of power, then I journal. My journal is about what went well yesterday, what didn't. Do I owe any amends that I didn't make already? And anything else, I just want to get out of my head onto paper. I don't need to carry a bunch of flotsam and jetsam into my day. This is my opportunity to vent. If anything bothers me, I'm not happy about something, I can work it out on paper, and then it usually takes the heat off it. It's not as interesting anymore because I've spilled it out. Additionally, every day I log my gratitudes again. I use a free app. It's called Presently. It forces me to recall what I was thinking this morning or just make new ones. And I have it all day with me to refer to on my phone to remind myself that I'm grateful. I find that understanding commonalities and addiction to others is a big issue in society as a whole. And I've said it many times that I think everyone on the planet would reap huge rewards by going through a 12-step program. Any of them. It doesn't matter. They can pick the one that's completely opposite of who they are, or maybe just the one closest to who they could be. But I know that the information and the tools that we get in this program doesn't just help us stop from acting out. They work to make us better people. Our addiction and our acting out is the symptom. It's not the cause. The real problem is inside. I mentioned it earlier. when we think to ourselves, I am not enough. That's probably the most powerful statement I know. It can take the biggest person and shrink them down into nothing. You are not enough. I am not enough. Now I know that I'm enough. Do I have doubts? Sure. Life isn't easy. I get upset. I get hurt. Maybe even offended. Is that still okay? But, through the lens of a sober addict in recovery, all of these problems are much more manageable. They're just things. They're interactions. They're weather. They're money. They're people. And it's really what life is about. I don't feel the need to run off and numb my emotions to act out with sex. Emotions such as anger, fear, lust, they all used to rule my life. And when I felt them, it was uncomfortable, and I didn't like that. I feel them now. I sit with them. I talk about them with my wife and friends. Now I embrace life, and I try to enjoy every day. I didn't understand the idea of being grateful to be a sex addict when I first started. In fact, I railed against even the idea of it for so long. I'd hear people say it in meetings, and I think, what is wrong with you? You want to be here? But that was new, Chris. And once I'd actually accepted my addiction and then the programs to solution to it, I understood. If I'd never been a sex addict, I would have been something else, but I still would have had all these broken bits inside of me. It was only through accepting my addiction and the program that I began to realize how powerful it was and how lucky I was to be in the program, how lucky I was to be a sex addict so I could receive this powerful message and spread it to others I meet. I'm enough, and so are every one of you. My name is Chris, and I'm a sex addict. Thanks for listening.
All right. Thank you, Chris, so much. Friend of Jason's, friend of Addison's, and obviously friend to all of us here today with your share. As per the agreement, the first 3 shares are going to be recorded, and then the recording will be cut off. Can we get a timer? Get someone to agree to be timer?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you, Matthew. Let's get some hands up to share observations, questions, etc. And then we'll know how much time to cut it off at. Who wants to go first? Okay, Remco, you are up.
Thank you, David. First of all, Chris, it's really inspiring, your words, even after the wonderful introduction of yourself by Edison. It's really inspiring to hear the results of the program and to hear and to relate to so many things you say. I'm really grateful I dialed in today, and it's a sign of my higher power. And I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be in a group of men like this, and I'm really grateful for what you have said. Thank you very much, Chris, and hope to hear you again. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Remco. Mark R., you're up.
Hi, Mark R., recovering sex addict, and I'd like to say thank you for your share. I related to a lot of it. Our acting out patterns were, in fact, very similar, and I agree with you that a lot of the acting out is rooted in feelings of being not enough, and also remembering that even in our worst moments, we're not necessarily bad people. We are good people that have done bad things. So that was a lot of wisdom that I appreciate you sharing. So again, I'm going to say it 3 times. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and have a great day. And I appreciate your service.
Thank you so much, Mark. James M., our third recorded one. Go for it, James.
Hey, my name is James, sex and fantasy addict. Chris, unbelievable share. I related so much to your life. I every time you said something, I just flash back of what I used to do, and to see that you recovered the way you have gives me so much hope that I too someday be able to do a share and like that and tell other addicts there's hope, because I'm telling you, we need that. We need people like you to serve, for a service to keep us going so we can one day achieve what you have achieved. And I'm so ever grateful for your share. And I'm James, sex and fantasy addict, and I'm grateful to be here.
Many thanks to Chris for sharing his story at the noon Zoom meeting and here on the podcast. Since I was so busy at work that day, I was unable to share afterwards, but I thought I'd be able to share here, and I'm so grateful for Chris and all of the service work that he does. It's been so amazing to see all the changes in Chris over the years, from when he first walked into the rooms and now to becoming a sponsor to many and starting up meetings, running workshops. His dedication to his hour of power is incredible. And yeah, since I'm not a morning person, I tend to shift my program work and meditation toward the end of the day. But yeah, Chris has led a few workshops at our annual retreat. One that I particularly remember was on the topic of gratitude. I know he actually came out to the retreat after moving to Reno and hope to see him there again soon. Anyway, so much gratitude for Chris for sharing his experience, strength, and hope. Thinking of gratitude, our annual Giving Thanks event is happening in Berkeley on November 4th, and further details can be found at the Bay Area SAA website under News and Events, and I will be sharing lots of links for that in the show notes. And I did want to read a little bit from our flyer, which says, join us for the 21st annual San Francisco Bay Area Giving Thanks. Enjoy food, beverages, and fellowship. Partners are welcome. Lunch is provided, but feel free to bring a dish to share. And this year we have a few QR codes on the flyer, one for an RSVP. And we also have a QR code for donations. And this is an afternoon of celebration for fellow addicts, as well as a fundraiser for the ISO. And another part of the flyer says, help us raise funds to support the International Service Organization, ISO, and to give thanks to our fellowship. Hear a member talk about the importance of the ISO and the projects Giving Thanks supports. So again, the links for that will be on the BayAreaSAA.org website, and I will have specific links in the show notes for various ways to make donations if you're able to do that. And one easy way is to text BAGT to 91999, and that is specifically for the Bay Area Giving Thanks. That keeps track of how much money we're raising as part of this fundraiser. And since November 4th was the original date for the SAA and COSA speaker meeting, we shifted that to Sunday, November 5th at 5:30 p.m. And details for the speakers and the Zoom link will be posted on the website once we have them. And with that, I wanted to turn to a few YouTube comments. There are 3 quick comments here that I wanted to cover. The first was from episode 6, the first year of recovery. And a comment that says, this disturbs others, however, it helps me. Glad to be selfish. Yes, it is not for everyone, but if it helps you, that is so awesome. The next one we got was from episode number 4, The 3 Circles, A Tool of Recovery, and says, thank you, gentlemen. You've given me the courage. So glad it's helping others get the courage to get started in this program. Really grateful for that. And lastly, just a quick one on episode 17, LJ returns to share more in depth, and it just says, God bless you. Awesome. And thinking of the YouTube channel, there was an email that I received. So I'm not going to read the entire email, but it had 2 questions here. Number 1, can you help steer me in the right direction or have suggestions to continue listening to all the podcasts in numerical order? And this was in reference to listening to the podcast via YouTube. And if you're just listening to individual episodes, it can be a little bit difficult, but we do have a playlist that is specifically geared towards the podcast, and all of the episodes are in order on that playlist. We do have a few other videos on the Bay Area SAA YouTube channel, and those are not included in that podcast playlist, but the episodes are in order. Some of the other things that I listed in responding to this is you can directly listen with the podcast player on our host site, which is sarpod.libsyn.com. And we also have the podcast player here on the Bay Area SAA website, and that is bayareasaa.org/podcast. And I know we've got one set up on the UK website, and Pittsburgh is setting up a new website that will also have links to the podcast player there as well. And with the podcast player, it's nice you can play them in order. If you don't have a podcast app of choice, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Google Podcasts, and things like that. So anyway, the second question was, is the episode recorded on 9/18/23 available for listening? And if so, what episode number would that be? And that is this very episode. That's when we recorded Chris at the noon Zoom meeting. And so that is episode 108. Another email that I got is from C from Delaware. And it says, there is one song that I can relate to that helps my recovery. It's a ballad from Black Sabbath. The name of the song is Changes. My first wife passed away in 1999 in September. My addiction started with her, and I still haven't gotten over my addiction. The song really hits me in the gut every time I hear it. I have a question too. I spoke to a gentleman, and thanks to him, he gave me the courage to call a man's group that meets on Monday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm in need to find a sponsor. Can you please direct me in the right direction? I also have a copy of the Green Book as well. Anything you can do would be highly appreciated, and thank you for your time. So before sharing the music, I wanted to respond to that. In terms of looking for a sponsor, if you are a regular at a meeting, you can always look around the room, whether it's in person or on Zoom, find out someone whose recovery you admire and ask if they have the availability to sponsor. Some meetings, like our noon Zoom meeting and my in-person home meeting, we have a phone list that has columns for those that are looking for sponsors and those that are available to be sponsors. Those are a few ways to start looking for a sponsor. I still want to do an episode on sponsorship, and hopefully I can get that together soon, talking about what sponsorship is, how to find a sponsor, and things like that. I will put a link into the show notes for this episode, as well as in my response to this, there is a pamphlet called Getting a Sponsor. But yeah, the best thing you can do is to ask around, see if your meeting has a sponsorship list, and always check out other meetings if your regular meeting doesn't. There are lots of meetings around. But yeah, back to the song by Black Sabbath, and like some of their other songs like Planet Caravan, and one that I know that I've played on the podcast, Solitude. Changes is another surprising ballad that has such a mellow vibe and is so touching. So I wanted to play a little bit of Black Sabbath's Changes.
I feel unhappy. I feel so sad. I've lost the best friend that I ever had. She was my woman. I loved her so. But it's too late now. I've let her go. I'm going through changes. I'm going through changes.
Such a beautiful, beautiful song. And yeah, I can see definitely how that would hit you in the gut every time listening to that. I also wanted to play a clip from the soul singer named Charles Bradley, who did a beautiful version of this that went viral in 2015. I was so surprised to see on YouTube, soul singer sings Black Sabbath, and this song was such a fitting choice.
We shed the years we shared each day. In love together, we found a way. But soon the world had its evil ways. My heart was crying. Love went astray. I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it. Oh, it hurts so bad in my life. It's gotta be a change in my life. Somebody gotta help me.
Love his voice and his passion. Sadly, Charles Bradley passed away in 2017, but yeah, such a beautiful, beautiful voice. And I love the way he changed the lyrics from I'm going through changes to I'm going to change it. Back to the emails, there were a few that I wanted to share, and they were covering episode 107, which was just before this. And the first comes from someone who's written in before, and wanted to read that. Just listened to episode 107, and I loved Andrew's share. It briefly mentions MAP, minor attracted persons. Is there a group for such like persons? I would really love to find out to aid in my recovery. And yes, I mentioned that in the beginning of that episode and put some links into that episode. There is an intergroup called Fellow Travelers, which covers meetings that are geared toward minor attracted persons, and that is ftrecovery.org if you are interested in that. And the last email that I wanted to read also covered episode 107. This one says, thinking about you, Jason. Thank you for sharing your hardships at the start of the most recent episode. It reminds me that you are human like the rest of us, and I'll be talking a little bit about that in a few minutes. I listen to this podcast on a Saturday while I travel from a stop to stop for my job. This also means I'm missing my local in-person meeting. I'm so grateful for this podcast and for Andrew's courageous share. My eyes swelled up with tears to hear his amazing experience, strength, and hope. Thanks to the guys on episode 107, I got in a meeting today. I really admire Andrew's emphasis on service, and I've been really discouraged by my local group because they don't have quite the excitement for service that I do. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Higher power is working through you guys, so please keep up the great work. And please share this email as you feel relevant on your podcast. No hard feelings if you don't share it. I trust your judgment. Also, I nervously volunteer to be a guest on your podcast. I'm super busy with school, work, and my family, so it may be hard and a way off in the future, but I think it would be good for me. Special extra thanks for the tradition discussions, too. Really look up to you and the guests on your show. I use this podcast as a guide for my sponsees. I always refer them to your First Step podcasts so they can get an idea of what to share. My 3rd anniversary of sobriety from porn and casual sex and cheating on my wife is coming up in October. Thanks to SAA, I stay sober and live a healthier life that I never could have dreamed of, one day at a time. Signed, M. Yeah, so grateful for your email. And yes, I read it here on the podcast. So I do thank you for trusting my judgment. And yes, would love to have you as a future guest on the podcast. Whenever you are ready to do so, I usually record on Tuesday or Wednesday evenings around 7 to 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. It can also shift around things for people that are not on the West Coast. But yeah, those are the spots that I usually set aside for recording. And just thinking of that and this email, I will be scheduling some new recordings soon. But like I mentioned on episode 107, I've been going through a lot of stuff, a lot of fears and anxieties around changes at work. There was a position that I really, really wanted to get that ended up going to someone else. And so I was sitting in a bit of depression over that. But I also applied for another position that was very similar, but a little bit outside of my comfort zone. So I've been in anxiety around that. There are a few other things going on within my family that I'm not going to be sharing here on the podcast at the time. Things are absolutely fine. It's just emotional. So yeah, recently having the week off of work and going camping was really awesome. But again, this week I've been just, as soon as I get home from work, instead of working on the podcast, I'm tending to find other ways of relaxing, mostly binge watching TV shows and things like that. But I am excited to be doing one of my outer circle activities that I haven't done in quite some time, which is putting together jigsaw puzzles. My wife and I both thought of it independently today, and that we've got some jigsaw puzzles that we've been wanting to do for a while, but haven't done that. And it is such an awesome tool that I use to help with fear and anxiety. It helps get me out of my head. So I'm looking forward to doing that this afternoon. And just thinking of the podcast, like I mentioned, the future episodes of the podcast, I'm putting together another Joe and Charlie set of episodes. This next one will be a setup for step 2 from their recordings called The Big Book Comes Alive. And I think I'm going to try to share as much of that as I can going through the rest of the steps. Bill's story basically covers step 1 and some of the other steps as well. The chapter on more about alcoholism is again mostly focused on the problems of drinking, but the chapters There Is a Solution, We Agnostics are places where they start to work on step 2 and spirituality. There's a section called Appendix 2, the spiritual experience. There's also a section at the beginning of the book called The Doctor's Opinion. And I'm trying to figure out where I want to start the recordings for that for an episode. So those will be coming up in the future. Like I mentioned, since I've been overwhelmed with a lot of stuff, I haven't been responding to a lot of emails or scheduling. So I am starting to do that again. I got a wonderful email through the Bay Area SAA.org website rather than through the sexaddictsrecoverypod.com email, looking at someone who had found the podcast and wants to be a future guest. And I will probably read that email on another episode, but there's another source. And there are people that have been on a list that I'm trying to schedule. So now that I'm getting back into it, I will be setting up new recordings soon. And like I mentioned in, I believe, episode 107, that with the holidays coming up, I'm probably going to slow down the release schedule, but I'll try to get in as many as I can. So with that, I'm going to close out this episode. And if you had any songs that help you in your recovery, like our emailer, or had any other feedback to provide for the podcast, you can email us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, or you can email me directly at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com if you wish to be a future guest. So again, I thank you so much for tuning in this week, and as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.